speech. Here now, Brit Hume, Fox News senior political analyst. Brit, good evening to you. What did you think, first of all, of his speech, his statement on the floor, and his assertion that he was taken out of context, misquoted?
Well, you know, I can kind of see his point, but I'm sorry. You know, the juxtaposition of, you know, what's wrong with those terms and the phrase white supremacist is just too close for comfort. And I think that he was on the right track when he went along with the resolution today that condemned that. And this whole episode, Martha, is testament to something that I think is very important to understand, which is the great achievement of the civil rights movement was not necessarily the passing of the laws, important as they were, the civil rights laws. It was also the great national, overwhelming national consensus against racism. So if you're touched with that label, racist, you're in severe trouble. And what's happened to Steve King is proof of that. It also raises, though, an interesting question for journalists. How are we to handle comments that some describe as racist or for which they would accuse someone of racism? An interesting thing happened today at NBC News, just to cite one news organization. They sent out a word to their people that they were not to characterize his statements as racist, but only to simply to say these were statements that some are calling racist. Well, the left-wing Huffington Post got all over them about that. And the next thing you know, NBC News had rescinded that guidance and says you're perfectly free to say that what Steve King said is racist.
Brett, let me pull up that statement.
Because he's
sorry to interrupt. We have that statement, and I just want to put it up on the screen. The original statement was NBC tells staffers not to directly call Steve King's racist remarks racist, as you have pointed out. Then they came on and said, we revised our guidance on Representative Steve King's comments. It is fair to characterize King's comments as racist and point out that he has a history of racist comments. Brett.
Martha, he's not going to get any awards for being a civil rights leader. But the New York Times did somewhat the same thing today. They had a big piece that said, you know, his long history of racist comments. I read every one of them. And some of them weren't even about race. Some of them were about Islam. Islam's not a race, it's a faith. Many of them might be considered insensitive, but they weren't racist. Racism means a very specific thing. It means the belief in the superiority of one race over another. And it is taboo in the United States, as well it should be. But we need to be careful flinging this term around, because what's happened to this, tragically, is that this great triumph of the civil rights movement, making racism indefensible and intolerable, has been weaponized. And it is, and the term now, the adjective racist, is hurled around with abandon. It is the kind of thing that we in the news media need to stay out of the middle of. We shouldn't be getting involved in this. We shouldn't be throwing the word racist around with abandon. We should be very careful in how we use it. What NBC said to do in the first place, which was to leave it to others to characterize as racist, was the right call. The second call, in my opinion, was the wrong call. And that New York Times piece was completely bogus. I mean, those comments, look, I don't agree with them, and I'm no fan of Steve King, but I'm sorry, they did not amount to racism.
You know, I mean, it's interesting. You go through these, and as you say, there's two sides to this story. One is, as you say, you're no fan of Steve King. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. You know, Kevin McCarthy said he just heard this comment for the first time. He has a history of saying things that are controversial. And as journalists covering these stories, that is what you can say. And you can say that you know, some of these comments have been viewed as racist, and lay it out there and let people look at what he said and decide what they think. But when a newspaper, as the New York Times did, starts saying in the headline, put up the New York Times headline, guys, so that everybody can see this at home, Steve King's racist remarks and divisive actions, a timeline. And then they took everyone through it.
And the thing, Martha, you put your finger right on it. The best thing to do is simply to quote what he said accurately, and let the people of the United States who have no taste for racism make up their own minds as to whether it was racist or not. That's the rule. Now, if an opinion commentator comes along, like even myself, and wants to say that, that's his or her business. But to instruct your journalists to fling around a term like that with abandon like that, I think is absolutely one of the things that's wrong with the news media today, and why we as an institution stand in such low esteem. People think we're biased, and this suggests that indeed we are.
It's interesting that only Bobby Rush, Congressman Bobby Rush, wanted the censure. He wanted the full-throated censure, which is the toughest punishment that can be inflicted on a member of Congress by other members of Congress. Well, he was the only one. Well,
they're tougher. They can expel a member, but I know he wanted censure, but I mean, I think that he certainly had a tough day today, Steve King. And I think, he's trying to crawl back into good graces. But remember, he's been stripped of all of his committee assignments. Right. So he remains, Congress in committee is Congress at work. And if you're not on any committees, there's not a lot you can do except vote on the floor.
Especially when you're from Iowa and they took you off the Agriculture Committee, is going to be tough for him. Right. And that's the way the country works. He's going to have to go through an election. As he said, I'll be here for 2 more years, and then we'll see what happens after that. There's already a pretty active race against him. And the Des Moines Register has now called for him to step down as well. So the politics will step in, and we'll see whether or not he survives in his own state.
Yeah, let the people decide, right?
Absolutely. Brit, thank you so much. Great to see you tonight, sir.
You bet.